Hey everyone, welcome back to this channel, this compilation series I'm doing, counting down essentially my favorite games of all time. Today I'm compiling every video that I made in February over on my other channel, Jason Boxman. I think this will take us from about game number 330 something to like 305, if I remember correctly. But I'm probably gonna say it every time. Thank you so much for being interested in watching this series. It's something completely personal and self-indulgent for me. So the fact that you're here, you're enjoying it, you're on this journey with me, I appreciate it a whole lot, and won't waste any more time. Let's get right into February's videos. Tetris is Tetris. Detention is so not something I would normally ever play. A heavily artistic adventure horror game from Taiwan about kids in school. I actually really struggled to write a good synopsis for the plot of this one without getting too into the weeds about it. But for some reason its atmosphere has just stuck with me. I think about this game a lot. It's more unsettling than it is horror, which makes things easier for me. I do not take horror very well, and makes the normally inconsequential traversal of a point-and-click style adventure game kind of dreadful at times, and that's a compliment. I don't find myself going out of my way to play games like Detention very often. They really aren't usually my thing, but maybe I should, because these aren't the kind of games that you're just gonna stumble onto. You have to seek them out, and if they're anything like Detention, they ultimately end up being really worth it. I'm not even gonna try to sugarcoat the reason Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games is in this spot. Yes, the events are fun, and the crossover element does feel special, but when I was a kid, it was all about those story mode sequences, where they put you up against so many villains from Mario and Sonic's history, which was actually my introduction to most of these Sonic villains. And the dream events. I spent so much time with these two features alone, and they are where the identity of this game exists in my head. I have fought Perfect Chaos more times through figure skating than I have ever fought him with Chaos Emeralds and homing attacks. Even in the context of some simple Olympic games, that celebration of Mario, Sonic, and the joining of their worlds is delightful, and it only becomes more infectious for me as I get older and experience more of these worlds, getting a more complete picture of what was on display in that game that I put far too many hours in elementary school. I have a confession to make here. I've played a couple of the newer Mario vs. Donkey Kong games, and they do somewhat fall into the category of struggling to distinguish which game is which. But ultimately, the reason I'm okay with talking about Mario vs. Donkey Kong 2, March of the Minis anyway, is because it's probably the one I spent the most time with, and my praise is relatively universal to all the games that use this gameplay style. The idea of playing a game where you don't really control your characters is honestly not that appealing when you say it out loud, which makes it all the more impressive how fun this game is. Not to mention perfect for the DS with how intuitive the touch controls are to quickly interact with the environment, the thing this game is all about. I spent so much time in the level editor for this game and experimenting with the various ways the game's elements can interact with each other, and that was no doubt an early instance of me developing some interest in game design. It's a special connection a person has to the games that were miraculously not blocked on the Wi-Fi at your school. An easy favorite of mine being the Bloon's tower defense games. While the first and third games were the ones that I played the most during my time at school, the most recent entry that I had played at the time of doing this comparison was Bloon's Tower Defense 5. For me, this game is all about the desire to play a game well enough that you make enough money to upgrade your monkeys as far as they can go. The feeling of domination, destruction, and satisfaction that comes from some of these top-level monkeys is so intoxicating. And learning better strategies for optimizing the game's economy is all worth it to pursue that end, while also having the excellent side effect of making the main game more fun to play too. Hershey Park, Pennsylvania, a place near and dear to my heart. I love their funnel cake, I love Chocolate World, they have so many great roller coasters, and lucky for me, I hate roller coasters. So when I went to Hershey Park growing up, I always got so excited to rush over to the arcade and play some Street Fighter 2. I know Street Fighter II needs no introduction from me, as it's without question the most important fighting game ever made, but it being on this list has nothing to do with that historical context. I still find value in this game regardless of how clearly old it is, even playing it far beyond the time I spent at Hershey Park and exploring all the various versions. The core of what the Street Fighter series is today is still present here, meaning the core of fighting games as a genre is still in this game. Ken and Cammy are two of my favorite characters in the genre, and a lot of their DNA started here, meaning I can still pick up Street Fighter 2, pick Ken, Cammy, or honestly nearly anyone on this roster, their movesets are also iconic and well known, and just go at it. I am not good at this game, and I honestly have no intention of ever being good at it. It's just reliable. It's interesting to experience history for a little bit, made better by the fact that it doesn't feel completely obsolete, even with how old it is. And it's the best possible game to be playing if you're at Hershey Park. I have checked several times. The only Mario and Luigi game I've finished, Dream Team has a lot going for it, but to me, it really stands out in one area more than any other. The dream sequences, and the absolute nonsense you do with Dream Luigi. I feel like we don't talk enough about how there's a game out there where Mario fights with essentially an army of Luigis like they're Pikmin. This is one of the least strategic RPGs I've ever played, and that's more than okay, because I just want to hit things with my giant Luigi hammer, my giant Luigi ball, or just my giant Luigi. The brotherhood between Mario and Luigi is of course at its best in this series, and I'm truly sad that we may not see these characters reach these heights again. Dream Team is a beefy adventure for the 3DS, and it certainly has no trouble standing out among the crowd of other Mario RPGs for me. Far and away my favorite PlayStation 1 Crash game as a kid. I played Crash Bash with friends and family all the time. I came to love this roster of characters, and while the number of minigames you can play is small, it's the escalation and progression of them, including boss battles, that's so unique and thrilling for a party game collection. Pushing the campaign to the forefront is a bold choice for a game like this, but it ultimately ends up being what I remember the most from this game. It was a brilliant choice for a system that didn't support the robust 4-player options of its competitor at the time. And for a bit of commentary that's usually only used when talking about fighting games, I love the announcer in this game. It's like the unhinged discount version of a Mortal Kombat announcer. And even though my peak playtime with this game was nearly 2 decades ago, his voice is never going to leave my memory.
Crash wins.
It is about time this name comes up in this series. I love Sonic the Hedgehog, and out of all of his outings on his debut system, the Genesis, at least of the ones I've played, Sonic CD is my game of choice. The weird dystopian edge this game has is so cool. The color palette it adopts as a result is right up my alley, as is the general world design, which just gets so weird and wild for being so early in this franchise. It's almost as weird as the soundtrack for this game. The music honestly sometimes gets weird beyond reason, but with that comes some of my all-time favorite Genesis music. Talking about Tidal Tempest, I'm talking about Quartz Quadrant, I'm talking about Stardust Speedway. Sonic does get some unique movement options that I really appreciate in this game too, like the super peel out or the emulation of 3D at certain parts. And all of these elements come together to make a package that I so appreciate. I'd enjoy a remake of this game, but more than that, this is just a mood that I wouldn't mind Sonic hanging around even more. If you just say the phrase, Tetris with physics, my ears will automatically perk up. That idea alone sold me on Tricky Towers. But when I started playing it, it didn't take long to learn that it's so much more than that. Everything about the approach you take to a falling block puzzle game changes once true gravity and mass are incorporated. The task of building a tower as high as possible, as fast as possible, or maybe even as low as possible, all take on completely new challenges and complications in this context. Throw in great multiplayer options, even power-ups, and Tricky Towers always feels fresh as a result. I was a big ol' Marvel guy growing up. Give me a game with over 150 playable Marvel characters and I'm probably gonna like it. The LEGO gameplay formula really lends itself naturally to a cast of characters that are known for distinct powers, and the fact that, so far, these LEGO games are really the only games we have that let us play in a giant open sandbox with a cast of Marvel heroes makes them super valuable to me. Even just writing this video and remembering this game has made me want to go out and pick up the game's sequel. That's probably a good sign. This game's simplicity really just had me in a trance while playing it. Every character is a rectangle. Each rectangle has its own properties. Use those properties deliberately to complete levels. It's like it's made to satisfy every base level gaming instinct that I've grown to have. And the whole game just flows as a result. The narration that accompanies the whole game is so enjoyable too, bringing you through an unexpectedly wide range of emotions with a very unique kind of comedic tone. It's a cozy little game Thomas has here. The lack of super fast futuristic racing games is a strangely consistent topic in the gaming world, and one that I feel less compelled to participate in knowing that I have fast RMX. It's the perfect modern fulfillment of the genre as far as I'm concerned. In games like this, I want to feel cool, I want to feel fast, I want to feel like I could fly off to my death at any moment, and I want future-y looking stuff. Fast RMX delivers all of that easily. This feels like one of the most generalized segments I've done so far, but I really think just looking at the gameplay should convey to you everything you need to know. And if you're the kind of person who's been waiting for this kind of game, I really hope you give Fast RMX a try. PlayStation AllStars is a game I really wish turned into a franchise. So many great ideas on how to bring different game worlds together spawned in this game. So many great characters that we would never expect to appear in a crossover game now live in PlayStation AllStars. I really do like this roster, and their relatively expansive movesets really help them come to life in ways that very naturally draw your mind back to their original media. The increased focus on narrative elements was a universally welcomed addition, and I just know that if this team got to push their ideas even further with more installments, it would have been able to become something even more special. Maybe it'll still happen, who knows? My show here is all about optimism. PlayStation will have another crossover game one day, I'm sure of it. Wario Land, Super Mario Land 3 is a very funny title. And good job Wario on getting elevated to protagonist status in just the first sequel after you were introduced. The personality of Wario is the standout feature of this game to me, as it probably is for this whole Wario Land series. Even in the simple ideas, like his noticeably grosser appearance compared to Mario, his core unique mechanic being his charge move, the level design feels way more condensed in this game, the enemies are super unique. This is not a Mario game at all, so it's no surprise that this game managed to spawn a wildly unique series all on its own. I remember being so sure about myself that I wasn't going to like Disney's Aladdin as much as everyone else was hyping it up to be. It's just an old platformer license game. What is there to get excited about? And yeah, of course I was completely wrong and this game is great. It's a beautiful Super Nintendo game with, most importantly, great acrobatic controls that make flying through this admittedly pretty difficult game feel effortless and joyful. I love the way you bounce off enemies with your hands, or the way you can swing on hooks, or the way you attack with apples. It infuses so much personality into the characters on top of just playing great. Not many games from this era are able to accomplish both of those things at the same time. Of course, I had to be there for the moment the Pokemon series gave the Pokemon community what it had been asking for since the 1990s, long before the idea was actually technologically possible. Open world Pokemon, where the creatures roam about freely, you actually aim and throw your Pokeballs, you control your trainer on the field mid-battle, all without the restrictions of a grid or overly automated systems, like everything that you've ever heard a Pokemon fan talk about wanting. Pokemon Legends Arceus was an exciting entry for me for all of those reasons, and it taking place in the distant past where the wilds feel truly untamed, and even civilization is clearly on the frontier was even more compelling to me. And no matter how many Pokemon games I play, Legends Arceus is always going to feel special to me for those reasons and for those leaps that it took. If I can be open and honest for a moment, I'm worried this one's gonna be really hard to write, but we'll see what happens. Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes has some of the best stealth action gameplay we have ever seen. There is endless fun to be found in exploring different ways to approach this one map. I really appreciate the dedicated snapshot we got for this pivotal moment in the life of Big Boss. And with the context of the full Metal Gear series being finished for years now, I really do understand now why such a short adventure was packaged on its own as this game. Ground Zeroes is simply a must-play title for anyone interested in the Metal Gear series, even if it can easily be beaten in one sitting. Whew. Okay, that actually wasn't as hard as I thought. Cool. One of the very, very few games I'll be talking about here with the distinct feature that you can literally not play this game anymore. We all know and love the original Super Mario Bros., and since we know it so well, the added zaniness of making it a battle royale with Super Mario Bros. 35 was just the injection of intensity and difficulty that I personally needed to make this game surprising again. I like applying this style of battle royale to a more active game like Mario. You make so many conscious decisions with regard to how you're interacting with your opponents than you usually do with these kinds of games. What enemies are worth taking the time to send over to your opponents? How fast are you going to move based on what enemies they're sending to you? Defensive versus offensive play is much more of an active choice in Mario 35, and I love that the most basic baseline, simple Mario game ever was given so many extra layers of decision making with virtually no changes made to its timeless core mechanics. Mario Golf was one of the Mario sports series that I never plunged into as a kid. But when I realized it'd be a good game to play with my little brother, Mario Golf Super Rush became my entry point into the series. And it's like this. Golf is such a technical game, and that includes golf video games. Now, I really like complicated video games, but Mario Golf seems to have unlocked the formula for giving you tons of depth that most players are never going to utilize, while keeping all of those nuanced elements actually fun. Nuance and depth, like getting to play as King Bob-omb, getting to play as a Ninja, or getting to play as a Chargin' Chuck. These are the real things I look for in good game design, and I'm happy to report that Super Rush delivers it in spades. Now, I might have just been too straight-laced back in school, but for some reason, a game about having to follow more and more rules issued by a questionable authority figure is really appealing to me. Tower of Heaven is a short burst of challenging platforming wrapped up in a beautiful Game Boy-esque presentation, a look that doesn't get nearly as much nostalgic love as other systems from its time, and Tower of Heaven has a very distinct identity in my mind as a result. It's tough, but in this case, that difficulty, paired with the triumphant music and how confident you look up towards the sky when your character jumps, just makes me want to push forward no matter what. It's a very engaging 30 minutes of fun. From a video game emulating a Game Boy platformer to an actual Game Boy platformer. How well Super Mario Land 2 holds up despite its hardware is astounding. How huge of a leap it was over its predecessor is astounding. This being the last time we had a mainline Mario game where the antagonist wasn't Bowser is also kind of astounding. I don't think the Land series gets its due credit for how creative and different it was. Something that people always seem to ask for out of the Mario series. So much about this game, from the enemies, the mini-games, even stuff like the end goal, is unique to these little Game Boy games. And I'd also like to add that Mario Land 2 has some great sprite work for one of the most limiting pieces of visual hardware Nintendo has ever produced. I think the most impressive thing about Super Mario Land 2 is how it's still perfectly playable today. I even think that'd be the case for people who started with the most modern entries in the Mario series. How do you say the name of this game out loud? I actually don't know. I think people just call it VVV, but that is not how it's spelled. VVV is a game all about a mechanic that is always one of the coolest highlights in any 2D platformer it shows up in: switching gravity. That is the star of the show, and the number of ways they find to make that idea challenging is seriously impressive. I like how the minimalist presentation lets that mechanic take center stage while still giving the game an adequate sense of adventure and exploration. It's challenging tracking down your missing crew members. It's one of the most precise platformers I'm gonna talk about. But how are you gonna let yourself get frustrated and have a bad time when your smile is that big? Alright, so a lot of people had a bit of a Newgrounds nostalgia kick when Friday Night Funkin' came out. But actually for me, my kind of big Newgrounds nostalgia episode had happened a few years earlier with Pico Sim Date 3. A fact that I am only slightly embarrassed to be admitting to you. Hey, I talked about it before. You don't get to decide what games your high school Wi-Fi doesn't block, okay? Even though this is a game that 1000% should have been blocked. There are two things that made this game appealing to me other than reminiscing about the early days of internet culture. I love the art style and how specifically internet culture-y the girls are. Like, internet culture that I can actually identify because this is when I was on the internet a lot. I find it weirdly cozy. But more than that, this is a dating sim where you can land the girl in like 10 minutes. And if there's one thing that real-life romance and dating lacks, I think it's efficiency. But the point is, this game moves fast, which when paired with its pleasing visuals creates a game that's really easy for me to jump in and play when I don't want to give up too much time. The game makes me feel comfortable, which I think is a good thing to say about a dating simulator. I don't know if a doctor would agree with me on that. Add it to the list of things from this series I'll have to talk about in therapy. Full transparency for a moment, I'm really shocked that Crash Bandicoot 2 is this high, but I'm okay with it. The relatively grounded naturalist setting, at least for a game in this genre, combined with the tight, corridor-esque level design really invokes that feeling of exploring a dense jungle to me, where your movements maybe aren't as free as you'd like, but yet there's something comforting about being in a place with a lot of life, if not particularly intelligent life. It feels really rewarding to make progress in this game with how precise you have to be. I know we've been seeing a lot of difficult platformers lately on this list, and Crash 2 is certainly another one of those. But when death is this well produced, who's really gonna mind? I know everyone says this, but it is weird that this game exists. Moving through Hyrule to the beat of the music is a lot more intuitive and engaging than I would have expected. And it's exciting to see new life being given to so many timeless Zelda themes. It's also a delight to see such beautiful sprite work in a time when the Zelda series seems to have all but moved on from the age of 2D. The rhythm mechanics found in Crypt of the Necrodancer are so solid for such an innovative idea, and seeing those systems applied to a game with more direct and deliberate progression creates an absurdly fine-tuned experience, and one that goes down so smoothly in a series that's known for more larger-than-life, high-commitment epic adventures. How on earth has this series gone on for so long? Dozens of entries covered. And I have yet to talk about a single video game based on Star Wars. Literally my favorite thing. Besides, like, family and all the stuff I'm supposed to put first in life. But Star Wars! The Force Unleashed 2 was the first video game that I was ever so excited for that I pre-ordered the special edition, even though I don't even know if I wanted anything it came with. It did have this funny USB stick it came with that made Starkiller's hair stand up like a dummy, and that I did hold on to after all this time. Oh yeah, the game. It's short, but you do feel powerful. Absurdly so. It is a power fantasy in the purest form. It's hard to deny the fun factor of running around as an insanely powerful Force user with 2 lightsabers, even if it almost certainly goes against several core themes of Star Wars and should never be canon. But shooting TIE fighters with your big stupid Force balls and swinging a TIE fighter like an Olympic hammer, and look, I'll admit, I don't always go for the intellectual stuff. Starkiller is a character from Star Wars Legends that I really do care about. And while I'm bummed that this is the last time I saw him, it was a super vital chapter of his story that I'm glad I got to see. New Super Mario Bros. 2 was all about showering the player in a ludicrous amount of coins in as many creative ways as possible. And you know what? A Mario game having one really central idea that ties together the mechanics, level design, and aesthetic of the game is pretty cool and pretty rare. There's something simply satisfying in grabbing as many fake virtual monies as possible, and I think it lends itself to a portable format with relatively shorter level design. Though something less central to the game that I really want to call out is how this was a very early example of Nintendo experimenting with DLC. And I really like some of the DLC level packs in this game, especially the harder ones. I love when Mario gets hard, and he didn't do it a ton on the 3DS. I really appreciate it here. You want to talk about a unique, chill vibe? I got you a frog who has a laser-firing vacuum thing. The almost Atari-like visuals certainly give this game a level of identity on their own. But when I think about Cur Blaster, it's honestly the progression that I always think about. I make an effort to not get too into game design-y topics in these videos, but the progression system is really great in this game. Every upgrade feels so powerful and meaningful without actually giving you a game-breaking advantage in any way. And the progression of the conflict, both in the literal difficulty of the game and in the internal logic of the game's threat growing stronger. It's really, really well done. Cur Blaster is a good game. A good, weird, floaty frog game. And I know there's someone out there who's been waiting for a game like that. Here it is. And with that, we are already 1/6 of the way through this journey, also 1/6 of the way through the year. That's kind of terrifying. But yeah, thanks for watching the whole thing to the end. Hope I see you again in March. And thanks once again for sticking around this channel, hanging out with me. I appreciate you more than I can convey in a 20-second end card segment.